A person reaches for a glass of water and feels the movement as a simple choice. A harsh reply rises, then is withheld. A promise is kept when breaking it would have been easier. In such moments, freedom can seem immediate. We appear to stand at a small opening in the order of events, able to begin something that no prior cause fully explains. Baruch Spinoza asks us to close that opening. Every wish, hesitation, decision, and bodily movement, he argues, follows from nature with necessity. The human mind is not a private kingdom exempt from cause and effect. It belongs to the same reality as weather, stone, animal, and star. Nothing could have happened without a cause, and no cause stands outside nature. That claim appears to drain human life of its most valued qualities. If the angry reply was caused, why praise restraint? If a broken promise followed necessarily, why blame the person who broke it? If sorrow, courage, cruelty, and generosity all arise within one unbroken order, what could responsibility mean? Above all, how could joy be anything but a passing effect that happens to us? Spinoza's answer is among the strangest and most carefully constructed in philosophy. He does not restore freedom by making an exception for the will. He changes what freedom means. Freedom becomes clearer understanding, greater power to act from our own nature, and a gradual release from emotions whose causes we only dimly grasp. Necessity remains. Within it, a different kind of agency appears. To understand that answer, we will follow the movement of Spinoza's life and works, from Amsterdam and the ban imposed by his Jewish community to the severe architecture of the ethics. We will examine God or nature, mind and body, desire, emotion, virtue, scripture, and politics. We will also keep the difficulties in view. His proofs do not all compel assent. His political inclusiveness has sharp limits, and his account of eternity remains disputed. The question guiding us is therefore open but precise. If everything follows necessarily from nature, what kind of freedom can a human being honestly possess? Part 1. The quiet scandal of a necessary world. The scandal in Spinoza's philosophy is easy to miss because it arrives in calm language. He does not announce that life is meaningless. He does not describe human beings as puppets. He begins with definitions, axioms, and causes. Yet the conclusion reaches into every ordinary judgment. What we call contingency, the thought that an event might simply have gone another way, usually marks a gap in our knowledge. Events look accidental when we do not see the order that produced them. Imagine hearing a key turn in a lock late at night. Before the door opens, several possibilities come to mind. It may be a family member, a neighbor with the wrong key, or someone unexpected. Our uncertainty is real, but it does not follow that the approaching person is undetermined. One history is already arriving at the door. We merely do not know it. Spinoza extends this distinction between uncertainty and contingency to the whole of nature. This is stronger than the familiar claim that many events have causes. In the first part of the Ethics, Spinoza maintains that nothing in nature is contingent. Everything has been determined to exist and act in a definite way. His position is often called necessitarianism, though scholars disagree about how completely the strongest version follows from his system. On that strongest reading, the actual order is the only genuinely possible order. Even a slightly different history would not have been possible. The claim also changes how possibility functions in ordinary thought. We still need to plan, compare, and deliberate because finite minds do not know the entire causal order. Calling tomorrow's rain possible can be a sensible expression of incomplete information. Spinoza does not ask practical language to disappear. He asks us not to turn our uncertainty into a metaphysical power by which an event floats free of determining conditions. That distinction remains practically useful. The natural response is resistance. Surely the key could have been misplaced. Surely a person could have chosen a different street or delayed a visit by 1 minute. Spinoza would reply that we are imagining alternatives while holding only a small part of the causes in view. If we knew the person's body, reasons, habits, surroundings, and the causes of those causes without limit, the sense of an open gap would disappear. The alternative is conceivable to us because our conception is incomplete. Necessity, however, is not the same as fatalism. Fatalism says that an outcome will occur regardless of what happens along the way. Spinoza says almost the reverse. The outcome occurs through the causes along the way. Locking a door, learning a fact, asking for help, or changing a law can alter what follows because each action becomes part of the causal order. A cause is not powerless because it too has causes. The river's current is caused, yet it still moves the branch. This point protects practical life from one common misunderstanding. If illness follows from nature, treatment also follows from nature. If ignorance has causes, teaching can become a cause of understanding. A resigned person who says that nothing matters because everything is necessary has not accepted Spinoza's view. That person has overlooked the difference between being caught in causes we do not understand and becoming a more capable cause within them. Still, a harder problem remains. If instruction improves someone, can that person take credit? If punishment deters harm, does the offender deserve suffering? Spinoza will separate explanation, moral evaluation, and social protection in ways that do not fit comfortably with ordinary ideas of desert. He allows us to distinguish helpful from harmful, stronger from weaker, active from passive. He does not need a will that floats free of nature to make those distinctions. The working thesis of this account can now be stated. For Spinoza, freedom is not the absence of determination. A free action is determined from the agent's own understood nature as fully as a finite being can manage, while an unfree action is driven largely by external forces and confused ideas. Complete self-determination belongs only to infinite nature. Human freedom comes in degrees. It is an achievement within dependence, never an escape from dependence. This transformation of freedom is the thread that joins his metaphysics, psychology, ethics, theology, and politics. A mind becomes freer by understanding causes. A citizen becomes freer through institutions that reduce fear and arbitrary domination. A religious community becomes less oppressive when speculative belief is separated from civic obedience. Before those connections can be traced, we need the particular life in which the problem took form. The life gives the abstraction its weather. Part 2. Amsterdam, Community, and the Herem. Baruch Spinoza was born in Amsterdam in 1632 into the Portuguese Jewish community. His family belonged to a population shaped by migration from the Iberian Peninsula, where Jews had faced expulsion, forced conversion, and the Inquisition. Amsterdam offered greater room for Jewish communal life, commerce, and learning, though its toleration was conditional and its religious communities guarded their standing within the Dutch Republic. Spinoza was also known as Bento in Portuguese and later as Benedictus in Latin. All three names carry the sense of being blessed. He studied at the community's Talmud Torah school and learned the scriptural and interpretive traditions expected of an educated member. The surviving record does not justify the romantic picture of a solitary child already rebelling against every teacher. He grew within a dense world of language, law, trade, worship, and inherited argument. His father, Michael, was a merchant and a respected communal figure. When family responsibilities increased, the young Spinoza left formal study to work in the importing business. His later writings show knowledge of Hebrew scripture and Jewish philosophy, especially the rationalist problems associated with figures such as Maimonides. They also show engagement with Latin learning, Descartes, the new sciences, and circles of Christians who questioned established doctrine. The synthesis was already underway. On the 27th of July, 1656, when Spinoza was 23, the governing board of the Talmud Torah congregation placed him under a Herem, a communal ban. The surviving Portuguese text condemns grave heresies and deeds in severe terms. It does not specify them. Spinoza had not yet published a philosophical work, so any exact list of charges is a reconstruction. Later doctrines make some reconstructions plausible, but plausibility is not archival certainty. Historians have proposed several connected reasons. Spinoza would reject a personal and providential creator, deny ordinary personal immortality, question the divine authorship and permanent authority of biblical law, and treat nature as an indivisible causal order. Such positions threatened central teachings. The community also lived under watchful Christian authorities and had reason to fear accusations that it tolerated irreligion. The ban may therefore have answered intellectual, communal, and political pressures at once. It is tempting to stage the event as a clean contest between one free thinker and a closed religion. That picture is too simple. The Amsterdam community was itself a refuge built by people whose families had endured coercion. Its leaders used communal discipline partly to preserve a vulnerable institution. None of this decides whether the ban was just. It does remind us that the agents on every side acted inside histories of fear, loyalty, and limited power. A Spinozist explanation should be especially alert to those causes. After the ban, Spinoza lived beyond the authority of the congregation. By 1661, surviving letters place him in Regensburg, near Leiden. He later moved to Voorburg and then The Hague. He supported a modest life in part through skilled work with optical lenses and participated in a network of correspondents who discussed philosophy, mathematics, experiments, theology, and politics. Stories that turn his simplicity into saintly legend should be treated cautiously. The well-attested outline is sufficient. In Regensburg, he worked on the unfinished treatise on the emendation of the intellect and an early short treatise. In 1663, he published a geometric exposition of Descartes' philosophy, the only book issued under his own name during his lifetime. He was already developing the ethics. But public conflict over theology and political authority led him to set that project aside and write the Theological Political Treatise, published anonymously in 1670. His correspondence shows a thinker working through friendship rather than isolation. Henry Oldenburg questioned him about nature and scripture. Willem van Blijenberg pressed him on evil and responsibility. G. H. Schuler asked about freedom. These exchanges did not always produce agreement, and Spinoza could be abrupt. They nevertheless show the ethics growing within objection, clarification, and reply. The geometric book had a social workshop behind it. That book defended freedom of philosophizing while advancing a naturalistic reading of Scripture. It was widely condemned. Spinoza completed the ethics by 1675, but withheld it when hostility gathered. In his last years, he began the Political Treatise, an unsentimental study of institutions that remained unfinished at his death in The Hague in 1677. Friends soon published the ethics and other manuscripts in the posthumous works. The shape of this life matters without becoming a psychological key to every proposition. Exclusion does not mechanically explain his metaphysics. Len's work does not prove that he saw society as a polished instrument. Yet his circumstances clarify the stakes of his ideas. He knew communities could preserve life and restrict thought. He knew toleration could coexist with danger. The question of freedom was never only an inward puzzle. It concerned how finite beings live together under forces no one commands. Part 3. A New Republic of Ideas. Spinoza wrote during a period when older theological frameworks met new forms of science, commerce, and political conflict. The Dutch Republic combined remarkable publishing activity and relative toleration with confessional division, censorship, and struggles between Republican and Orangist power. The same society could shelter dissenters, suppress books, and witness political violence. For a thinker of causes, this was a living study in the instability of freedom. The contrast became especially visible in 1672, when political crisis ended in the killing of the Republican leaders Johann and Cornelis de Witt by a crowd. Accounts of Spinoza's immediate reaction contain details that are difficult to verify, but his political works plainly register the larger problem. A multitude can be mobilized by fear against the very conditions that allowed public freedom to develop. This setting prevents an easy story of progress. New science could challenge inherited authority, but technical knowledge could also serve new authority. Commercial openness connected distant lives while coexisting with exploitation. Republican institutions widened participation for some while excluding many. Spinoza's naturalism did not emerge in a steadily brightening age. Liberation and domination occupied many of the same arrangements. René Descartes provided one decisive intellectual starting point. Descartes had proposed that mind and body were distinct substances. The essence of mind was thought. The essence of body was extension. He also sought clear and distinct knowledge through disciplined method. Spinoza retained the demand for intelligibility and much Cartesian vocabulary, yet he rejected the picture of two created substances joined in a human being. The rejection changed everything. If mind and body are separate substances, their interaction becomes mysterious. How does an unextended thought move an extended limb? Descartes offered a physiological story involving the brain, but the metaphysical gap remained. Spinoza removed the gap by denying that either a human mind or a human body is a substance. They are two expressions of one finite individual within the single order of nature. No transfer is required. Thomas Hobbes supplied another nearby challenge. Hobbes treated human desire and political authority in naturalistic terms, without appealing to a supernatural moral order at each step. He described individuals as seeking preservation and states as products of power, fear, and agreement. Spinoza shared the refusal of political fantasy, yet he differed on important points. Natural right, for Spinoza, is not a moral permission laid over power. It extends as far as actual power extends. That equation sounds like approval of domination, but its purpose is initially descriptive. A large fish has the natural power to eat a smaller one. Calling this natural right does not say that the event is ethically admirable. It says nature does not contain a separate court that suspends causal power until moral permission arrives. Ethical and political evaluation must be built from what helps beings flourish together, not from an imagined exemption from nature. Spinoza also inherited problems from medieval Jewish rationalism. Maimonides had explored how scriptural language about God's body, emotions, and actions should be interpreted when reason rejects literal anthropomorphism. He treated human intellectual perfection as closely related to knowledge of God. Spinoza carried the anti-anthropomorphic impulse much further. His God does not choose among possibilities, issue decrees in time, or interrupt nature. Divine causation is the immanent necessity of reality itself. Ancient Stoic themes are present as well, especially the thought that peace grows from understanding necessity and revising our judgments. But Spinoza is not simply a Stoic in 17th century dress. His affects are bodily and mental changes in power, not judgments alone. He does not make each person an inward citadel. External relations remain necessary to life, and other people can enlarge our power. His ideal of reason is social as well as self-governing. The new mechanical sciences offered both a model and a warning. Their success encouraged explanations through law and cause, without final purposes attributed to nature. Spinoza opposes the idea that rain falls in order to water crops, or that eyes were designed because seeing was a goal nature held in advance. People notice what benefits them and project purposes outward. The projection then makes nature resemble a ruler arranging events for human use. Yet Spinoza should not be recruited as a modern scientist born too early. His physics contains 17th century commitments, and his attributes cannot be translated without residue into today's scientific categories. He did not predict neuroscience. What remains striking is methodological. Human conduct is to be studied as part of nature, with the same patience used to study other events. Anger may be painful, but pain does not make it causeless. From these sources, Spinoza assembled a philosophy that belonged wholly to none of them. Descartes gave him problems of method and substance. Hobbes sharpened the naturalism of power. Jewish and other theological traditions framed questions about God, law, and blessedness. The Dutch Republic made toleration an urgent political matter. The resulting system would be presented in a form designed to make every conclusion appear connected to its grounds. The structure was meant to display that connection. Part 4. The Geometric Experiment. The Ethics looks less like a conventional essay than a book of geometry. It begins with definitions and axioms, then proceeds through propositions, proofs, corollaries, scholia, prefaces, and appendices. Later propositions cite earlier ones as a geometric proof cites established results. The title announces that ethics will be demonstrated in geometric order. This architecture is both a claim about truth and a device for retraining attention. Geometry promised freedom from personality and authority. A theorem does not become true because a ruler commands it or a priest repeats it. The reader can follow the relations. In a culture of sectarian conflict, this impersonal ideal had moral force. Spinoza wanted conclusions about God and human desire to stand or fall with definitions, causal principles, and reasoning, not with the prestige of a speaker. The form also enacts his universe. No proposition should appear from nowhere. Each follows from what precedes it, just as each natural event follows from causes. The reader repeatedly moves backward through references, discovering that a claim about jealousy depends on desire, a claim about desire depends on striving, and striving depends on the power expressed by finite modes. The page becomes a small image of causal dependence. The order can also slow the reader in a useful way. A familiar word such as freedom, idea, or perfection cannot be allowed to carry its ordinary associations unnoticed. The definitions force repeated return. This discipline is sometimes frustrating, and Spinoza's own usage is not perfectly transparent. Yet the demand matters. Many philosophical disputes persist because one word quietly changes, meaning while the argument proceeds. But geometric dress does not guarantee geometric success. A proof can be formally arranged and still contain a doubtful definition, an ambiguous term, or a step that does not follow. Critics have challenged central arguments for the uniqueness of substance, the necessity of all modes, and the eternity of the mind. The correct response is neither to be hypnotized by the format nor to dismiss it as decoration. Each argument requires separate judgment. Spinoza's freer prose often shows what the demonstrations conceal. In the prefaces and scholia, he anticipates objections, comments on experience, and writes with controlled irony. These passages reveal that the geometric system is not emotionally cold. It studies hope, grief, envy, courage, shame, love, and resentment because ordinary life is saturated with them. The austere method is meant to understand turbulence, not pretend turbulence away. The earlier treatise on the emendation of the intellect begins from a more personal register. Its narrator has discovered that wealth, honor, and sensual pleasure are unstable when pursued as final goods. Their value depends on relations and use. The search turns toward a lasting good connected with understanding the mind's union with the whole of nature. Knowledge is introduced as a transformation of life, not an ornament added to it. That unfinished treatise considers several ways of knowing. Hearsay may tell a person a birth date. Unorganized experience teaches that fire burns or that people die, but it does not reveal why. Inference from general principles improves on this. The highest form grasps a thing through its essence or proximate cause. In the ethics, this early scheme becomes the three kinds of knowledge: imagination, reason, and intuitive knowledge. The treatise also rejects an infinite regress in method. We do not need a perfect tool before we can make any tool, because simple natural instruments allow better instruments to be fashioned. In the same way, the intellect begins with available true ideas and increases its power through their use. Method is reflective knowledge of how understanding works. It is not a certificate obtained before thinking starts. Here, the ethical purpose of method becomes visible. Clearer ideas are not valuable only because they copy reality accurately. They change what a mind can do. Confusion leaves us more exposed to forces we cannot organize. Understanding connects an effect with its causes and gives the mind a more adequate role in what follows. The geometric experiment is therefore a practice of agency, even where its particular demonstrations fail. The next step is the system's most demanding one. If freedom depends on acting from our nature, what is that nature within? Spinoza's answer begins by removing the walls around ordinary things. A person, a table, and a cloud are not independent substances. Each is a temporary and determinate way in which one infinite reality is expressed. Part 5. One substance, no outside. The first definition we need is substance. Spinoza calls substance what exists in itself and is conceived through itself. It does not depend on another concept in order to be understood. This is a demanding standard. An ordinary chair exists through wood, design, pressure, craft, and a surrounding world. Its conception sends thought beyond the chair. It is therefore not a substance in Spinoza's strict sense. Very few things meet it. A mode is different. A mode is a modification of substance, something that exists in and is conceived through something else. Consider a wave. It has a shape, direction, and duration, and it can be distinguished from neighboring waves. Yet it is not a second material placed inside the sea. It is the sea moving in a determinate way. The analogy is imperfect, but it helps loosen the assumption that every distinct thing must be an independent thing. An attribute is what the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance. Spinoza says infinite substance has infinitely many attributes. Human beings know two: thought and extension. Extension is not one large physical object, and thought is not one enormous human mind. They are basic ways in which the one reality is intelligible. Particular bodies are modes of extension. Particular ideas and minds are modes of thought. Why do we know only these two attributes? The Ethics gives no simple story of a mind surveying an infinite list and selecting thought and extension. Human minds are ideas of extended bodies, so these attributes define the form of our access. Other attributes, if the argument succeeds, are no less real for being unavailable to us. Infinite reality exceeds the conceptual windows through which a human being encounters it. The argument then moves toward substance monism, the claim that there is only one substance. Spinoza reasons that substances sharing an attribute could not be distinguished by their modes, because substance is conceptually prior to its modifications. An absolutely infinite substance would lack no attribute that expresses reality. Nothing outside it could produce or limit it. This unique, self-caused, infinite substance is what he calls God. The proof remains contested. These steps have generated centuries of argument. Critics ask whether the definition of substance already contains too much, whether the uniqueness of substance can be established merely by setting modes aside, and whether conceivability tracks reality as closely as Spinoza needs. Even a sympathetic reader may find that the demonstrations move from a demanding vocabulary to conclusions secured partly by that vocabulary. The geometric sequence makes the pressure points visible, but it does not dissolve them. Suppose, for orientation, that we grant the result. Reality has no independent outside. Every finite thing is in the one substance and depends on it. This does not mean a teacup is an illusion or that all distinctions vanish. Modes are real, determinate expressions. The cup can break while the table remains. A mind can misunderstand one event and adequately understand another. Distinction exists within reality, not between self-standing islands of substance. Spinoza further distinguishes nature considered as active from nature considered as produced. The Latin phrases are natura, naturans, and natura naturata. Naturing nature refers to substance and its attributes as the immanent activity from which all follows. Natured nature refers to the modes and orders that follow. These are not two worlds. They are two ways of considering one reality, as productive and as expressed. Immanence is the key. A carpenter is a cause outside the table and remains separate from it. Spinoza's God is not an external maker standing before a possible universe. The cause remains within what is caused. Finite things exist in God, and divine power is expressed through their determinate powers. Nature is not a manufactured object that could be placed at a distance from its source. The view alters the emotional geography of dependence. If we imagine ourselves as substances, every external influence looks like an invasion of a sealed self. If we understand ourselves as modes, relation is original. Air, food, language, memory, institutions, and other bodies are conditions of what we are. Freedom cannot mean independence from all relation, because such independence would erase the finite being whose freedom is in question. Dependence is not an accidental defect. This need not reduce a person to a negligible speck. A mode is finite, but its power is real. A melody depends on instruments, bodies, air, and learned patterns, yet it can organize a room for several minutes. Its dependence is the medium of its effect. Spinoza's finite individual is likewise a structured power among powers. The central ethical question becomes which relations help that structure act more coherently and which relations scatter it. The single substance now receives its most famous name. Spinoza writes of God or nature. The phrase can sound like a simple substitution, as if one familiar word were crossed out and another written above it. In fact, it changes the meaning of both. We therefore have to ask what remains of God when there is no creator outside creation, no divine choice among worlds, and no providential plan centered on human hopes. The claim that there is only one substance can sound remote from ordinary experience, but its practical pressure appears whenever we divide reality into privileged and discarded regions. If everything that exists is in nature, then nothing can be placed in a metaphysical wastebasket. Bodies, thoughts, storms, institutions, desires, and errors all require explanation within the same order. A harmful action is not unreal because it is confused. A painful emotion is not outside nature because we wish it absent. Spinoza's monism removes the comfort of treating difficult things as alien intrusions into an otherwise harmonious world. This removal changes the meaning of explanation. To explain anger is not to approve it. It is to ask what conditions made this anger possible, what ideas accompany it, what bodily changes sustain it, and what further effects are likely to follow. Moral condemnation may still play a social role, but condemnation alone does not reveal a cause. Spinoza repeatedly turns from ridicule and lament toward understanding, because only causal understanding can alter the sequence in which an affect grows. One substance also means that human beings do not occupy a kingdom within a kingdom. We are not exceptions to natural order who somehow begin chains of causation from nowhere. Our deliberations are real events in nature, shaped by character, memory, bodily state, language, and circumstance. The fact that a choice has causes does not make the choice imaginary. It makes the choice intelligible. A bridge does not cease to bear weight because engineering explains its structure. A judgment does not cease to matter because its formation can be studied. The doctrine also disciplines theological imagination. If God is not a person outside the world, divine action cannot be pictured as occasional intervention by a ruler who suspends natural order. Providence cannot mean that events were privately arranged around our hopes. This is emotionally severe. People often seek not only order but personal assurance that loss belongs to a benevolent plan. Spinoza offers intelligibility without that assurance. Nature is not cruel because cruelty implies an intention to make another suffer. Nature is also not kind in the human sense. It produces finite beings whose powers support and obstruct one another. Critics reasonably ask whether this God retains enough of what religious language has traditionally meant. A being without will, command, purpose, or personality may seem to be nature renamed. Spinoza accepts much of that consequence while preserving the word God to indicate infinite self-caused reality understood through infinite attributes. The vocabulary carries both continuity and rupture. It allows him to speak of intellectual love of God, yet the love is not directed toward a divine individual who might answer. There is a quiet equality in the system. No event is beneath explanation, and no person possesses a supernatural exemption from causal life. Human distinctiveness lies in the forms of understanding and cooperation available to us, not in escape from nature. This can reduce pride without reducing dignity. We are finite modes, but finite modes can become more adequate causes of what they do. They can understand relations, organize common power, and replace passive reaction with greater activity. The phrase "no outside," therefore, has ethical weight. We cannot export our unwanted motives to a realm of pure evil, nor can we imagine salvation as flight from embodiment. Change must occur through relations inside the world, better concepts, healthier habits, supportive institutions, truthful friendships, and arrangements that increase shared capacity. Spinoza's metaphysics is most alive when it returns thought to this field of immanent causes. Part 6. God or Nature. Spinoza's God is not a person magnified beyond measure. God does not deliberate, foresee a need, choose a goal, become angry, forgive an offense, or suspend a law of nature. Those descriptions project human psychology onto infinite reality. A will that moved from indecision to decision would change and would lack what it later acquired. Spinoza's God acts from the necessity of the divine nature, without hesitation or alternative. No personal preference precedes what follows. This is why the formula God or nature must be handled carefully. Nature here does not mean only forests, weather, and material bodies. Spinoza explicitly includes thought among the attributes we know, and he holds that infinite substance has attributes beyond our knowledge. Nor is God identical merely with the collection of finite things considered as a heap. God is the indivisible substance through whose attributes every mode exists and is conceived. Still, the God of traditional providence has been decisively displaced. There is no supernatural interruption because nothing stands above or outside nature. There is no creation in time from nothing. There are no purposes laid into rivers and illnesses for our instruction. When people call an event good because it serves them, they report a relation between the event and their needs. They do not discover the purpose for which the universe designed it. Spinoza's appendix to the first part of the Ethics analyzes how final causes arise. We are conscious of our desires but ignorant of many causes that determine them. Because we often act for ends, we imagine nature doing the same. We find eyes useful for seeing and infer that someone made eyes with sight as a prior aim. Then, when events injure us, we search for hidden purposes or blame divine anger. Ignorance becomes a reason to invent intention. Calling Spinoza a simple atheist therefore misses something, though many contemporaries treated him as one. He denied the personal, transcendent lawgiver central to Jewish and Christian orthodoxy. In that sense, the accusation is understandable. Yet he insisted that God necessarily exists, that everything is in God, and that the highest human good is knowledge and intellectual love of God. Those are not decorative phrases in the Ethics. The vocabulary carries real philosophical work. Calling him a pantheist may be useful if it signals divine immanence and the refusal of a creator separate from nature. It can also mislead. Pantheism may suggest that each finite object is individually divine in a simple way, or that God is only the sum of visible matter. Some scholars prefer terms such as substance monism or naturalism. Others defend religious readings. The labels remain disputed because Spinoza redraws the border between theism and atheism instead of standing neatly on either side. One objection is that he preserves the word God while removing everything that gave it religious meaning. If God has no intentions, hears no prayer, and offers no personal care, why not speak only of nature? The reply is that Spinoza's nature is not inert stuff. It is infinite, self-explanatory, necessarily existing, and inexhaustibly expressive. The word God marks the ultimate reality in which every finite power participates, and which understanding can love. His unusual definition of freedom is already operating here. Infinite nature acts only from the laws of its own being and is therefore free, even though it cannot act otherwise. An arbitrary divine decision would not add power. It would imply a reason not contained in the divine nature, or a period of indecision before the act. For Spinoza, necessity from within is the highest freedom, while choice caused from outside is constraint. A second objection moves in the other direction. If every cruelty and loss follows from divine nature, has Spinoza made suffering sacred? He does not infer that every event is good for every being. A poison can diminish a body. Political terror can reduce common power. Divine necessity removes cosmic blame, not finite differences between what composes and what destroys. Ethics begins precisely because modes can aid or harm one another. The distinction is subtle. From the standpoint of the whole, nothing violates nature. From the standpoint of a finite being, many encounters are genuinely bad because they diminish its characteristic power. These perspectives do not cancel each other. The broken instrument remains part of nature, yet it can no longer produce its music. Spinoza's ethical vocabulary describes such changes without placing evil in a supernatural substance of its own. Badness remains relational and real. God or nature thus supplies both the severity and the promise of the system. The severity is that no appeal escapes causality. The promise is that reality is intelligible in principle, and understanding does not lead away from the world toward a second realm. It leads more deeply into the relations that already sustain us. To see how this can transform agency, we must now locate mind and body within the same immanent order. Part 7. Mind and Body, One Order. For Spinoza, the human mind is the idea of the human body. This compact statement does not mean the mind holds a detached picture of the body, as a map lies beside a country. It means the body's existence under the attribute of extension and the mind's existence under the attribute of thought are one finite individual expressed in two ways. Mind and body are neither two substances nor two halves glued together. The ethics states that the order and connection of ideas is the same as the order and connection of things. Later readers have called this parallelism. Every bodily mode has a corresponding idea, and the causal order under thought matches the causal order under extension. But a physical event does not cross over and push a mental event, nor does an intention cross over and push a body. Causes operate within an attribute. That claim can be difficult because ordinary speech constantly describes mental and bodily interaction. Embarrassment warms the face. Coffee sharpens attention. A remembered appointment makes the legs hurry. Spinoza would not deny these coordinated events. He would say each sequence can be explained under thought and under extension. The decision and the bodily action are two expressions of one necessitated development, not messages passed between independent substances. The coordination belongs to their shared identity. The view avoids one problem of Cartesian dualism by refusing its starting point. No bridge is needed between mind and body because they were never separate beings. Yet the solution creates questions of its own. Why should one substance have attributes whose causal explanations cannot be mixed? How can a mind represent a body if representation is not cross-attribute causation? Contemporary scholars disagree over how identity, representation, and causal matching fit together in Spinoza's account. It would therefore be careless to announce that Spinoza solved the modern mind-body problem or anticipated neuroscience. Modern debates use concepts and evidence unavailable to him. His theory is a metaphysical alternative with enduring interest, not an experimental result. Its practical force lies elsewhere. It prevents the mind from treating the body as a servant whose failures are moral disobedience. Bodily condition and mental power vary together. Spinoza's brief physical account describes an individual body through a relatively stable pattern of motion and rest among its parts. Parts may be replaced while the pattern persists. A human body is exceptionally complex and capable of being affected in many ways while maintaining its organization. The richer this bodily capacity, the richer the corresponding capacity of mind can be. Human power is relational and compositional. Personal identity, therefore, becomes a matter of organized continuity, not possession of an indivisible mental pearl. Food becomes part of the body and old material departs. New ideas reorder memory. A person persists through change while a characteristic relation among parts is maintained. The boundaries are real enough for action but never absolute. Every human individual is also a part of larger bodily and social individuals. Consider a musician after years of practice. The knowledge is not only a sentence stored in a private mind. It lives in the sensitivity of fingers, the timing of breath, habits of attention, the instrument's resistance, and the ability to respond to other players. A change in bodily organization is also a change in mental capacity. The example is modern, but it captures Spinoza's refusal to split understanding from embodied skill. This also reshapes responsibility. Exhaustion, hunger, illness, and fear can narrow what a person is able to perceive and do. Recognizing those causes need not erase standards. It can make intervention more intelligent. A workplace that repeatedly produces dangerous mistakes through fatigue cannot explain everything by defective character. Changing the pattern of bodies, time, and information may increase everyone's capacity to act well. There is a risk of reduction here. If every mental event has a bodily expression, some readers assume that thought becomes unreal. Spinoza says the opposite. Thought is an attribute of substance, irreducible to extension in conceptual explanation. A reason is not secretly a bump in matter, even though the order of reasons has a bodily expression. His naturalism is not the simple claim that only physical vocabulary is legitimate. The mind, then, is not a hidden commander. It is an idea embedded in an order of ideas, expressing a body embedded in an order of bodies. Its freedom cannot consist in issuing uncaused commands. It must depend on the quality of its ideas, especially on whether they register isolated effects or understand the relations that produce them. The path from passivity to activity is therefore also a path from inadequate to adequate knowledge. Part 8. From Imagination to Understanding. Spinoza uses imagination in a broad technical sense. It includes sense perception, memory, testimony, signs, and the associations formed by bodily experience. Imagination is not mere fantasy. Much of daily life depends on it. We recognize a door, remember a name, follow a familiar road, and understand spoken words because past encounters have ordered images in the body. The limitation is that an image reveals our present bodily affection more directly than the external thing's full nature. A distant sun appears small. A rumor carries the shape of a speaker's report, not a complete causal history. A painful conversation becomes associated with a room, so the room later evokes unease. Such ideas are inadequate when they are partial effects detached from enough of their causes. Inadequate does not mean wholly false. The apparent smallness of the sun records a real relation among light, distance, eye, and body. Error arises when the partial presentation is affirmed without the ideas that would correct it. Spinoza's favorite model of falsity is privation, a lack within an idea's causal context. We do not need to remove the image. We need a stronger and more connected understanding that places it properly. Reason, the second kind of knowledge, works through common notions. These are adequate ideas of features genuinely shared by bodies or relations, such as general structures of motion, dependence, and composition. Reason does not float above experience. It finds what is stable and intelligible across encounters. Where imagination follows the accidents of a personal history, reason identifies patterns that can be understood by different minds. A common notion is not whatever most people happen to believe. Public agreement can reproduce the same inadequate image across millions of minds. The commonness lies in the feature itself and in its intelligibility from more than one perspective. This gives reason a social promise without making popularity a test of truth. Minds can meet through structures that do not belong to one person's private chain of associations. Suppose two colleagues each interpret a delayed reply as disrespect. Their memories supply different images, but both may understand a common pattern. Incomplete information allows fear to recruit past associations. That general understanding does not reveal every cause of this particular delay. It does make the reaction less isolated and less absolute. The affect can be connected with a wider order, giving other responses room to grow. Intuitive knowledge, the third kind, is more difficult. It moves from an adequate grasp of God's attributes to the essence of a particular thing. Spinoza illustrates kinds of knowing with a numerical proportion. One person remembers a rule, another derives the relation, and a third sees the answer immediately in the numbers themselves. Intuition is not a hunch. It is a direct intellectual grasp of how a singular essence follows within nature. Scholars debate whether intuition supplies truths beyond reason or grasps the same truths in a more immediate and particular way. The text supports its superiority but leaves its ordinary operation obscure. We should resist turning it into mystical access to private messages. Whatever else it is, intuitive knowledge is adequate, causal, and anchored in the intelligibility of God or nature. Adequacy also requires care. A human mind is finite and cannot contain the entire infinite chain of causes. How, then, can any human idea be adequate? Spinoza's answer relies on common notions and ideas whose content is complete within the relevant relation. We can understand a genuine structure without knowing every historical detail. Still, the boundary between adequate knowledge and a confident but partial model is not always easy to draw. This uncertainty makes intellectual humility part of the practical lesson, though Spinoza does not always sound humble. When an idea arrives with emotional force, its vividness does not prove adequacy. A clear causal model should connect experiences, survive correction, and increase coherent action. It should not merely flatter the mind with the sensation of certainty. Geometry itself must remain answerable to the adequacy of its starting points. Knowledge becomes liberating because an adequate idea follows from the mind's active power to understand, while an inadequate idea registers how the mind is partially determined by external encounters. No finite person becomes entirely active, yet the balance can change. A confused fear may be named, compared, located, and related to its causes. The causes do not disappear. The mind's participation in their order becomes richer. Imagination is not a defect that can simply be removed. It is the ordinary way finite beings encounter a world through partial effects. We see the sun as a small disk at a distance. Astronomical knowledge does not erase that appearance from vision. It changes what authority we give the appearance when making a judgment. In the same way, an emotional impression can remain vivid after we understand that it is incomplete. The aim is not to stop feeling the first presentation. It is to place that presentation inside a wider network of causes. This point prevents Spinoza's rationalism from becoming a fantasy of cold detachment. An adequate idea does not float above the body. Mind and body express the same individual under different attributes, so improved understanding belongs to an altered organization of life. Sleep, nutrition, social trust, education, and physical security affect what a person can attend to and understand. A community that keeps people frightened and exhausted cannot demand rational citizenship as though reasoning were independent of conditions. Common notions provide an important bridge. They concern features genuinely shared across bodies and relations, not private images mistaken for universal truth. Learning how bodies affect one another, how causes combine, or how a social arrangement repeatedly produces resentment can increase adequacy. The knowledge is common not because everyone already agrees with it, but because its object is a relation that can be understood from more than one perspective. Consider a workplace conflict. Imagination presents isolated scenes, a dismissive tone, an unanswered message, a promotion given elsewhere. Each image arrives with an emotional conclusion. One colleague seems malicious, another favored, the institution hostile. Some of this may be correct. Understanding begins when the scenes are connected to patterns, incentives, unclear authority, competition for scarce recognition, past interactions, and one's own expectations. The richer account does not forbid judgment. It makes judgment more discriminating and action more effective. Spinoza also explains why false ideas can feel certain. An idea does not announce the causes it lacks. From inside a partial perspective, the omitted conditions are invisible. Certainty of feeling is therefore not proof of adequacy. We often become aware of an effect in ourselves and invent a cause that preserves a coherent self-image. I am angry because the other person is contemptible. I am afraid because disaster is objectively near. I desire this because it is inherently good. The emotion supplies force to the explanation that accompanies it. Correction requires another idea with greater causal reach, not a command to stop feeling. Evidence, conversation, and repeated experience can reorganize the field. A person may still dislike the colleague while understanding that hatred magnified what one incident could support. Fear may remain while a probability becomes clearer. Desire may remain while its cost is no longer hidden. The transition is gradual because effects are embodied patterns, not sentences waiting to be replaced. This is also why freedom of thought matters politically. No authority can directly command understanding. It can shape speech through reward and punishment, but compelled agreement produces conformity rather than adequacy. Genuine conviction changes through reasons and encounters that the mind can integrate. A state that tries to control inward judgment works against the very rationality it claims to protect. From imagination to understanding is not a one-way ascent completed forever. Finite beings continue to receive partial impressions. The achievement is a growing ability to recognize the level at which an idea operates. Imagination guides ordinary navigation and preserves memory. Reason discovers common structure. Intuitive knowledge, in Spinoza's highest register, grasps a singular thing through its place in the order of nature. The levels can coexist. Wisdom lies less in despising appearance than in knowing what appearance alone cannot establish. Part 9. Conatus, the shape of desire. Every finite thing, Spinoza says, strives to persevere in its being. The Latin name for this striving is conatus. It is not a little conscious decision hidden in stones, plants, and people. It is the actual power by which a thing maintains and expresses its characteristic organization. A flame continues through changing fuel. A living body repairs, seeks nourishment, and avoids many injuries. A mind carries patterns of affirmation forward. Spinoza goes further. The striving by which a thing persists is its actual essence. Essence is not a silent blueprint placed behind activity. It is the determinate power itself. For a human being, this striving considered through mind and body is appetite. When we are conscious of appetite, Spinoza calls it desire. Desire is therefore not an embarrassing addition to reason. It is the human essence under a conscious form. This claim reverses a familiar moral picture. We do not first judge something good and then desire it. We often call something good because we desire it. Value begins in the relation between a striving being and what increases or decreases its power. Water is good for a thirsty body, dangerous in a flood, and neither good nor bad in isolation from a relation. Spinoza's ethics grows from these situated evaluations. Conatus is sometimes reduced to selfishness. That is misleading. A being strives to maintain its power, but human power depends deeply on others. Language, knowledge, care, tools, and political security are cooperative achievements. Two individuals who combine in a stable relation can form a more powerful individual. Seeking one's real advantage may therefore require supporting the capacities of other people, not defeating them. Nor does perseverance mean clinging to every current habit. A rigid pattern can undermine the larger organization it once protected. Someone may preserve pride at the cost of friendship, health, and learning. Because our ideas of advantage are often inadequate, desire can fasten onto what diminishes us. Conatus explains the energy of the attachment, not its wisdom. The striving to persist can be redirected through better understanding. There is an apparent puzzle. People sometimes risk or end their lives. Does this refute the claim that each thing strives to persevere? Spinoza argues that destruction comes from external causes, even when they work through a person's altered condition. A mind may be so reorganized by painful encounters that an action follows from a nature transformed by those forces. Many readers find this account insufficient, especially for deliberate self-sacrifice or self-destruction. The tension should remain visible. Conatus also gives responsibility a forward-looking dimension. When we ask why an action occurred, we look for the desire and idea through which a person sought some perceived good. Even cruelty generally appears useful to the person within a distorted field of fear, status, resentment, or imitation. Explanation does not make the harm unreal. It identifies what must change if the pattern is not to repeat. Consider an argument in which each person keeps adding evidence after the issue has become minor. Victory has become tied to self-preservation. A concession feels like a reduction of being. From the outside, the attachment looks absurd. From within, it is organized by images of humiliation and control. A more adequate understanding might separate continued existence from winning this exchange. The desire remains, but its object and root can change. Spinoza's model has a quiet generosity when used carefully. It invites us to see a difficult person neither as an uncaused source of evil nor as an empty mechanism. The person is a striving configuration with a history, vulnerable to encounters and capable of new composition. Blame may yield to analysis without yielding to permission. Boundaries can be set as causes that protect and reorganize common life. The vocabulary of striving now leads directly to emotion. An affect is a change in the body's power of acting, together with the idea of that change. Some changes increase capacity and are experienced as joy. Others diminish capacity and are experienced as sadness. The crucial ethical distinction will be whether these changes arise mainly through causes outside our understanding or through the active order of adequate ideas. Conatus is sometimes translated into the familiar language of self-preservation, but the phrase can mislead if it suggests a frightened organism merely trying not to die. A thing's striving is its ongoing power to persist as the kind of finite organization it is. For a human being, persistence includes activity, relation, understanding, and the search for conditions in which characteristic powers can be exercised. We do not only seek continued heartbeat, we seek forms of life in which thinking, moving, making, loving, and cooperating become possible. Desire is consciousness of this striving, yet consciousness does not provide a transparent inventory of its causes. We know that we want, but we often do not know why this object has acquired its force. Advertising, imitation, memory, bodily need, status, and genuine usefulness can converge in one desire. Spinoza's account removes the moral drama in which reason stands outside desire and issues commands. Reason is itself an expression of striving, a more adequate way of pursuing what supports our power. Good and bad, therefore, concern relations to our nature and flourishing. We call something good because we desire it, but desire can be confused about what actually increases our capacity. A short-term pleasure may establish a dependence that narrows future action. A difficult practice may initially feel unpleasant while building skill and resilience. No abstract label settles the matter. We must examine patterns of consequence. The relational character of Conatus matters. Another person's power is not automatically a threat. When people can agree in nature and coordinate activity, each becomes more capable through the other. Language, science, law, friendship, and commerce all show powers that no isolated individual could possess. This is why rational self-interest can support generosity and justice. Helping to create reliable conditions for others may increase the common power on which one's own life depends. The idea does not make conflict disappear. Finite beings compete for resources, recognition, safety, and control. Under passive affects, one person's imagined advantage can be tied to another's humiliation. Envy is sorrow at another's good, while ambition can turn social recognition into a struggle without a stable endpoint. Institutions can intensify these affects by making insecurity permanent. Spinoza's politics begins from this realistic field rather than assuming citizens are already guided by reason. Conatus also offers a careful alternative to moral self-hatred. A destructive habit is still an expression of striving under inadequate conditions and ideas. The person seeks relief, belonging, stimulation, or escape through a pattern that diminishes broader power. Understanding the sought good does not excuse the damage. It reveals where change might enter. Simply attacking the desire may strengthen shame and secrecy. Building another route toward relief or connection can alter the causal arrangement. There is no promise that understanding always wins. A stronger effect can defeat a weaker insight. Spinoza compares human power with the infinitely greater force of external causes. Illness, violence, poverty, and loss can overwhelm the arrangements through which a person had lived actively. His ethics should not be turned into blame directed at those whose capacities are constrained. The language of power is descriptive before it is evaluative. At its best, Conatus joins humility with effort. We are not sovereign wills, but neither are we inert. We are organized powers inside larger networks of power. Freedom grows when we understand those networks well enough to participate in them more actively. Desire becomes wiser not by ceasing to desire, but by learning which relations enlarge a life without requiring the diminishment of others. Part 10. Effects, Joy, and Bondage. Spinoza begins his study of emotion by refusing contempt. Love, hatred, anger, envy, ambition, pity, and fear are not stains that make human beings exceptions to nature. They have causes and regularities. In the preface to the third part of the Ethics, he proposes to consider human actions and appetites as if he were considering lines, planes, and bodies. The comparison aims at clarity, not emotional numbness. Three primary affects organize much of the account: desire, joy, and sadness. Desire is conscious striving. Joy is a passage to greater perfection, meaning an increase in the power to act. Sadness is a passage to lesser power. Perfection here does not mean moral purity. It refers to reality or capacity. A joyful transition makes more coherent activity possible. A sad transition narrows what the being can do. Love is joy accompanied by the idea of an external cause. Hatred is sadness accompanied by such an idea. Hope is an unstable joy connected with an uncertain future or past outcome. Fear is an unstable sadness tied to the same uncertainty. When doubt is removed, hope can become confidence and fear can become despair. Spinoza builds a wide emotional vocabulary from changes in power, imagined causes, time, and uncertainty. The resulting psychology explains why emotions spread. We imitate the affects of beings we imagine to be like ourselves. If we see another person praised, we may desire the same object. If a group repeatedly associates danger with an outsider, fear can circulate before anyone examines the cause. Social life is not a meeting of isolated choosers. Images and effects move through a multitude, combining and dividing its powers. Public feeling has a causal life. An affect is passive when we are only a partial cause of what occurs in us. The external encounter has not been adequately understood through our nature. An affect is active when it follows from adequate ideas, so that our own power explains the change more fully. The words passive and active describe degrees of causation and understanding. They do not sort emotions into a simple list of bad feelings and good feelings. Joy can be passive. Sudden praise may increase confidence, yet if well-being depends entirely on applause, the same external source can withdraw it. The person rises and falls with judgments that cannot be controlled. Sadness is always tied to diminished power, but understanding sadness can become part of an active reorganization. Spinoza does not ask us to paste a smile over loss. He asks what each affect enables, what causes it, and what ideas sustain it. The same broad emotion can appear in more and less active forms. Love based on idealization binds joy to a fragile image of another person. Love shaped by better understanding can take greater account of that person's real nature and independence. It remains relational and therefore vulnerable, but it includes more adequate causes. Spinoza's categories are gradients within a living relation, not labels fixed forever. This is one reason his psychology resists a simple program of emotional control. An affect carries information about a relation, even when that information is partial. Suppression may remove an expression while leaving its determining image untouched. More durable change comes from ideas and practices that compose a stronger effective pattern. Such change takes time because bodies retain associations after a verbal conclusion has been accepted. The fourth part of the ethics calls our inability to moderate effects bondage. A person in bondage may see what would be better and still follow what is worse. This is not a mysterious failure of a sovereign will. The weaker idea loses to a stronger effective cause. Knowing in a thin verbal way that anger is harmful may have less power than the vivid image of an insult. Truth must become effectively organized if it is to change conduct. That is why a true idea does not automatically erase a passion. Spinoza says an affect can be restrained only by an opposed and stronger effect, not by truth considered as a pale abstraction. Reason produces its own desires and joys. Understanding a common cause can supply a stable satisfaction. Cooperation can be experienced as increased power. The education of emotion is therefore not the victory of cold intellect over desire. It is a reordering of desire through more adequate ideas. There are limits. We remain parts of nature and cannot avoid being acted upon. Bodies age, accidents occur, and other powers exceed ours. Complete mastery is a fantasy. Spinoza's free person is not untouched by grief or vulnerability. Freedom grows where understanding makes effects less scattered, less dependent on imagined personal offenses, and more connected with durable sources of activity. This account can sound like a technique for accepting injustice. If anger is understood causally, should it be dissolved while harmful conditions remain? Spinoza's politics answers no. A shared understanding of oppression can increase collective power and motivate institutional change. The issue is not intensity alone. An affect becomes more active when its causes are understood, and its expression composes a stronger common capacity instead of consuming itself in blind reaction. Joy is central because it names an increase, not a reward delivered after virtue. A mind becoming more adequate is already moving through joy. A friendship that enlarges both people's ability to think and act is ethically valuable in its living operation. Freedom is felt when it is felt at all, as an organized expansion of power. We are now prepared to ask how this freedom can be genuine when the movement toward it remains fully caused. Part 11. Freedom without an uncaused will. Spinoza defines a free thing as one that exists from the necessity of its own nature and is determined to act by itself alone. A constrained thing is determined by something external to exist or act in a fixed way. At the level of absolute substance, God alone is fully free, because nothing stands outside infinite nature to constrain it. Human beings are finite modes, so their freedom can only approximate self-determination. This definition makes necessity part of freedom. God is not free because God can choose among uncaused alternatives. God is free because divine activity follows from divine nature alone. A triangle would not become freer if it could refuse its properties. For Spinoza, action without intelligible determination would be randomness, not agency. The relevant question is where and how the determination is organized. In a letter to G.H. Schuler, commonly numbered Letter 58, Spinoza offers a memorable illustration. Imagine a stone receiving an impulse and continuing to move. If the stone became conscious only of its striving, while remaining ignorant of the impulse and surrounding causes, it would believe it moved by a free decision. Human beings make a similar mistake when they know their actions and desires, but not what determines them. The image is sharp, but it can mislead. A human being is not merely a stone with an illusion. Human bodies are vastly more complex, and human minds can form adequate ideas of causes. The moving stone cannot understand the system that moves it and reorganize future encounters through that understanding. A person can, at least in degree. The analogy attacks uncaused choice. It does not erase differences in power. Suppose a person repeatedly checks a message after a tense exchange. Each glance feels chosen. A causal account may reveal bodily agitation, learned expectations, fear of rejection, the design of the device, and an image of relief. Once these relations are understood, a new arrangement becomes possible. The device is put away, attention is redirected, the feared interpretation is examined. These actions are caused too. They are freer insofar as they proceed through a more adequate grasp of the person's own pattern. Can someone be responsible on this account? If responsibility means being the uncaused origin of an action, Spinoza rejects it. If it means that an action expresses a person's character, ideas, desires, and power, while remaining answerable to social response, a naturalized form survives. We still distinguish the falling branch from the deliberate assault because the causal organizations differ. Deliberation can respond to reasons, anticipate consequences, and change through education. Praise and blame also become causes. Their justification cannot rest simply on metaphysical desert. Encouragement may strengthen useful action. Condemnation may protect a community, express shared limits, or deter harm. But vindictive suffering for its own sake adds sadness without rational benefit. Spinoza's approach tends toward correction, protection, and prevention, though his own political writings sometimes grant sovereign power more broadly than modern readers will accept. Its justice must be judged by those effects. A concern remains. If someone acts from a deeply integrated but cruel set of adequate beliefs, would that count as free? Spinoza thinks adequate reason reveals that cooperation with other human beings usually increases our power. Hatred and cruelty depend on inadequate ideas and unstable passions. Yet critics may doubt that rational self-interest always produces benevolence, or that every organized oppressor misunderstands personal advantage. The link from understanding to ethical agreement needs argument, not reassurance. Another concern is that freedom in degrees may appear to change the subject. Ordinary free will asks whether the same person in the same total conditions could have done otherwise. Spinoza says no. He then offers autonomy, rational activity, and diminished external determination. Some readers find this a valuable reconstruction. Others conclude that he has preserved a practical ideal after denying freedom in its primary sense. The disagreement is partly about which ideal matters. Spinoza's strength is his refusal to buy dignity with mystery. A choice becomes more ours when it expresses more of our understood nature, not when explanation fails. The musician's improvised phrase is caused by years of practice, present attention, bodily skill, and other players. Those causes do not make it less expressive. They make the expression possible. Freedom is not an empty interval before the note. It is the organized capacity that can produce the note well. Responsibility, in this light, is neither absolute authorship nor passive resignation. It is the work of becoming a more adequate cause and of arranging shared conditions in which others can do the same. We answer for actions because answers, consequences, reflection, and institutions participate in what we become. Necessity closes one picture of the open will, then opens a field of formation. That field is where finite responsibility has its life. Spinoza's denial of free will can initially seem to empty responsibility of meaning. If every decision follows from prior causes, why deliberate, educate, reward, blame, or change? The question assumes that these practices matter only if a choice begins without causes. Spinoza reverses the picture. Deliberation and education matter precisely because they become causes. A reason offered at the right time can reorganize an idea. A law can alter incentives. A friendship can reduce fear. Consequences participate in the formation of future action. The contrast is not between caused behavior and free behavior. It is between different kinds of causation. In passive action, what happens through us is explained largely by external forces and inadequate ideas. In active action, what happens follows more fully from our understood nature. Both remain within necessity. Freedom is greater self-determination through adequacy, not exemption from the order of nature. An ordinary skill makes this less strange. A beginning musician feels trapped by each technical demand. Attention is consumed by finger placement, timing, and fear of error. Years of disciplined practice do not remove causation. They build a more integrated cause. The skilled player responds with a freedom unavailable to the beginner because training has become organized capacity. Spinoza's ethical freedom resembles this acquired fluency. Understanding and habit expand what a person can do without requiring a miracle of uncaused choice. This account changes blame. Condemnation often assumes that the wrongdoer could have produced a different self at the exact moment while all causes remained the same. Spinoza rejects that counterfactual, yet society still needs protection, boundaries, and consequences. The relevant questions become forward-looking and causal. What arrangement prevents further harm? What response supports repair? What conditions produce the pattern? Which capacities can realistically be strengthened? Punishment for the sake of hatred only adds another passive affect. There is a danger of technocratic misuse. If behavior is causal, authorities may claim permission to manage citizens as objects. Spinoza's own emphasis on common power and freedom of thought pushes against that conclusion. People become more active through understanding, not through manipulation hidden from them. An institution that secures obedience by fear may produce order while diminishing rational agency. Efficient control is not the same as freedom. The denial of uncaused will can also soften private regret. Regret often imagines a past self standing outside every pressure, fully able to choose with present knowledge. A causal view asks what the person actually understood, feared, desired, and could do. This need not erase remorse. It can make remorse useful by connecting the event to conditions that can now be altered. The past remains necessary, but understanding it becomes part of the cause of a different future. Necessity is not fatalism. Fatalism says the same result will occur regardless of what anyone does. Spinoza says what anyone does is part of what makes the result occur. Effort, planning, and political organization are causes within nature. The fact that their existence also has causes does not make them irrelevant. A flood follows natural necessity, and so does the building of a levee. Freedom without an uncaused will is demanding because it removes both pride and excuse. We cannot claim absolute authorship of our virtues since they grew through relations and conditions. We also cannot say that causation makes effort pointless, since effort is one of the most important ways causal life is reorganized. The free person is not outside necessity. The free person understands enough of necessity to act with greater coherence inside it. Part 12. Virtue as power. The word virtue often suggests obedience to a rule against desire. Spinoza returns it to the language of power. Virtue is human power itself, the capacity to act from the laws of one's own nature under the guidance of reason. A virtuous life is therefore not a campaign against Conatus. It is Conatus becoming more coherent and more adequately informed. Good and evil are not properties stamped onto things from eternity. Good is what we certainly know to be useful to us. Evil is what obstructs a genuine good. The qualification certainly no matters. Immediate appetite can mistake a brief increase for lasting power. An intoxicating victory may produce later dependence. Reason compares relations across time and asks what preserves and enlarges the whole person's capacity. Spinoza sometimes introduces a model of human nature, an image of greater rational stability toward which we can measure change. He knows that nature itself contains no imperfect draft of a person. Perfection and imperfection are comparative notions. Yet practical thought needs orientation. We call a skill improved because it approaches a chosen form of competence. In ethics, the model is a human being capable of understanding, self-command, friendship, and shared flourishing. What is most useful to a person, Spinoza argues, is another person living under reason. Two rational individuals can compose their powers without the rivalry produced by unstable goods. If knowledge is shared, one person's possession does not deprive another. If both understand a common cause, their agreement can increase the activity of each. This is the basis of rational generosity, a desire to aid others from strength rather than from fear or guilt. The claim does not make Conatus secretly altruistic. A rational person supports others because common power is part of individual power. This can sound calculating, but the calculation changes when the self is understood relationally. Caring for the conditions of another's agency is not always a sacrifice laid against one's own being. It may be one of the ways that being becomes larger, safer, and more intelligent. Spinoza distinguishes strength of character into firmness and nobility. Firmness is the desire by which a person strives to preserve being under reason. Nobility is the rational desire to aid other people and join them in friendship. These are active affects, not duties imposed from an external moral law. The free person seeks what builds durable agreement because hatred, envy, and domination bind everyone to unpredictable external objects. This ethics is not ascetic in any simple sense. Spinoza values food, music, beauty, exercise, and varied pleasures when they restore and compose the body. The problem is not enjoyment, but captivity to one object at the expense of the whole power of living. A capable body can be affected in many ways. Balanced pleasure may support understanding more effectively than anxious self-denial. The ideal can become too smooth. Human interests do conflict, resources are limited, and people reasonably disagree even after reflection. Structures of power can make one group's apparent harmony depend on another's silence. Spinoza's confidence that reason brings human beings into agreement may understate these differences. His later politics is more realistic, designing institutions for people who remain passionate instead of waiting for universal wisdom. There is also the problem of vulnerability. If virtue is power, does illness become vice? Spinoza's technical language can sound harsh here. A diminished capacity is a lesser power, but it need not be a moral fault. The causes may lie overwhelmingly outside the person. Ethical judgment should attend to the power available within actual conditions, and to the shared obligation, in modern terms, to remove needless barriers. Spinoza's relational ontology supports that extension even when his vocabulary does not state it. Virtue brings its own satisfaction because active understanding is an increase and expression of power. Happiness is not payment for virtue, as if nature kept an account and later distributed prizes. Blessedness is the activity itself at its most adequate. A person does not restrain destructive impulses in order to purchase joy elsewhere. The growing capacity to act without being tossed about by them is already a more stable joy. This gives the good life a distinctive tone. It is energetic without being frantic, social without requiring self-erasure, and disciplined without appealing to an uncaused will. Its highest form will be the intellectual love of God, the active joy that accompanies intuitive understanding of things in their necessity. Here, Spinoza's naturalism begins to use the language of eternity, and the system reaches its most beautiful and most contested claims. Part 13. The View under Eternity. To understand something under a form of eternity is not to picture it lasting forever. Eternity, for Spinoza, is not endless time. It is existence conceived as following necessarily from a thing's essence. When reason understands a structure without tying its truth to one date or location, it already views that structure outside the sequence of before and after. Intuitive knowledge brings singular things into this eternal intelligibility. It is a different dimension of understanding. Consider a quarrel remembered only as a chain of injuries. In time, each sentence appears as something that arrived and might have been otherwise. Viewed causally, the exchange can be understood as the meeting of two histories, bodily states, expectations, and fears. This does not make the injury acceptable. It places the singular event within an order. The mind moves from replaying an isolated wound toward grasping how such an event could follow. Spinoza thinks the knowledge that things are necessary weakens certain passions. Grief over a lost good may lessen when we fully understand that the good could not have been preserved under those conditions. The claim should not be turned into a demand for quick acceptance. A sentence about necessity is not the same as adequate understanding, and grief as bodily causes that argument alone may not overcome. The effect depends on how deeply the causal view is integrated. The intellectual love of God arises from the third kind of knowledge. To understand a finite essence as following through God or nature produces joy accompanied by the idea of God as cause. Because the understanding is active and its object is not a changeable external possession, this love is not a passive dependence. It is the mind's satisfaction in participating knowingly in the infinite order that it already expresses. God does not return this love as a person returning affection. Spinoza's daring formulation is that the mind's intellectual love of God is part of the infinite love by which God loves God. Infinite thought understands itself through finite minds. The person is not absorbed into a supernatural personality. A local act of adequate understanding is nature's self-understanding under the attribute of thought. This may sound religious, naturalistic, or both. The experience it names is not gratitude toward a planner who arranged events for us. It is an active affirmation of intelligibility, including the recognition that we are not the center. Joy becomes less dependent on possessing one fragile object and more connected with understanding the relations through which all objects arise and pass. The eternity of the mind is harder. Spinoza says the human mind cannot be absolutely destroyed with the body, and that something of it remains which is eternal. Yet imagination and memory depend on the body's duration. The ordinary personality, with its remembered childhood, preferences, and private narrative, does not survive forever in his account. Eternity must not be confused with endless personal continuation. One interpretation holds that the eternal part of mind consists in adequate ideas, truths that do not become false when this body dies. Another emphasizes the eternal idea of the body's essence in infinite thought. Some readers find a coherent impersonal eternity here. Others see a contradiction with the earlier claim that the mind is the idea of an actually existing body. The ethics gives genuine grounds for dispute, and no quiet voice should disguise them. Even if the metaphysical doctrine fails, its ethical intention can be separated. A life organized around preserving the autobiographical self at any cost is dominated by fear of death. A mind absorbed in understanding attends to activity present now. The free person, Spinoza says, thinks least of death, because wisdom is meditation on life. This is not a promise that loss is unreal. It is a shift from counting duration to deepening what the mind can adequately do. The objection is that such consolation may feel too impersonal. We love particular voices, gestures, and memories, not only eternal structures. Their disappearance matters precisely because no abstract truth replaces them. Spinoza can answer that reason does not forbid particular love. It warns against making complete well-being depend on what cannot be secured. Whether that answer honors attachment or retreats from it remains an open human question. The uncertainty is part of the doctrine's lasting difficulty. Under eternity, freedom reaches its inward height. The mind sees its own necessity without treating necessity as humiliation. It becomes less occupied by fantasies of a self that might have stood outside every cause. Yet Spinoza never confines liberation to solitary contemplation. Fear and imagination are organized publicly through scripture, authority, law, and institutions. The movement from bondage to activity must therefore pass from the ethics into his works on religion and politics. To understand something under a form of eternity does not mean imagining it continuing through endless time. Eternity, for Spinoza, is not an infinite extension of duration. It is the necessity through which a thing follows from the nature of God or nature. The eternal view asks how a finite event belongs to an intelligible order rather than how long the event lasts. This distinction matters because fantasies of personal continuation can quietly replace the philosophical claim. The view changes emotional proportion. When a disappointment is experienced only through immediate duration, it can occupy the entire field. The missed opportunity appears as the final definition of a life. A more adequate understanding places it among causes, relationships, and other possibilities. The event remains painful, but it is no longer metaphysically isolated. It becomes one finite transition within a wider order that was never organized around personal expectation. This perspective should not be used to belittle grief. Telling a grieving person to see loss under eternity can become an intellectual refusal of love. Spinoza's own account of affect suggests that ideas have force only within lived causal arrangements. Understanding cannot be imposed from outside by a slogan. The eternal view develops through reflection, relation, and the gradual formation of more adequate ideas. The intellectual love of God belongs here. In understanding a singular thing through nature, the mind participates in the self-understanding of nature expressed under thought. The love is intellectual because its joy arises from adequate knowledge of the cause. It is not a request directed toward a listening personality, nor is it a reward granted after obedience. It is the activity of understanding itself experienced as an increase of power. Spinoza's language of the mind's eternity remains one of the most debated parts of the ethics. He denies that memory and imagination survive as a personal biography in the ordinary sense, yet he speaks of something of the mind that is eternal. Interpretations differ over whether this means impersonal participation in adequate knowledge, a form of intellectual blessedness, or something stronger. Caution is appropriate because the text combines geometric severity with language inherited from salvation. Practically, the eternal view asks us to loosen the demand that reality certify our personal centrality. We are not less real because we are not the purpose of the whole. A finite understanding can still become more adequate, and a finite life can contain real joy. Meaning does not need to be secured by endless duration. It can arise in the activity through which a part understands more truly the order to which it belongs. Part 14. Scripture without Supernaturalism. The theological political treatise begins from the instability of hope and fear. When people cannot govern circumstances by reliable knowledge, they become vulnerable to superstition. A sudden success is read as favor, a loss as punishment, an unusual event as a sign. Religious authorities can organize these affects, sometimes turning private uncertainty into public obedience. Spinoza's biblical criticism is therefore also a political psychology. His treatment of prophecy separates moral authority from philosophical knowledge. The prophets, he argues, possessed unusually vivid imaginations and a strong orientation toward justice. Their revelations varied with temperament, language, education, and prior belief. Prophecy could guide conduct without providing adequate knowledge of nature. A prophet's cosmology need not be scientifically or philosophically true for a scriptural narrative to encourage justice and charity. This distinction allows faith and philosophy to have different aims. Philosophy seeks truth through natural reason. Scripture seeks obedience in a practical moral sense. Trouble begins when theologians turn imaginative narratives into compulsory metaphysics, or when philosophers force Scripture to speak in technical concepts foreign to its authors. Spinoza's separation is meant to protect rational inquiry and the moral core of religion at the same time. Miracles receive the same naturalizing treatment. If a miracle means an event that violates nature's order, it is impossible because nature's laws express divine necessity. an extraordinary event may have causes we do not know. Calling it a miracle then records the limit of our understanding. It does not establish that God interrupted God. The more reliably nature operates, the more perfectly it expresses divine power. Spinoza also proposes that Scripture be interpreted through a history of Scripture. Readers should examine language, usage, authorship, transmission, contradictions, and the circumstances of composition. They should not assume in advance that every passage is literally true or internally uniform. In discussing the Pentateuch, he argues that Moses did not write the whole text and notes passages that point to later composition. He helped make historical biblical criticism systematic and politically consequential. Meaning, on this method, must be distinguished from truth. An interpreter may identify what an ancient author intended without deciding that the intended claim is philosophically correct. This distinction now seems ordinary in historical reading, but it carried disruptive force when doctrinal authority depended on collapsing the two. It also disciplines the critic, who must not make the text say whatever present reason prefers. He was not the first to question Mosaic authorship. Earlier Jewish thinkers, including Abraham Ibn Ezra, had noticed textual difficulties, and Hobbes had made related arguments. Spinoza's importance lies in the extent and method of his analysis, and in the conclusion he drew. Scripture is a layered human document whose sacredness depends on its capacity to promote justice and charity, not on perfect wording transmitted outside history. For religious listeners, this can sound like destruction disguised as interpretation. If prophecy offers no privileged natural knowledge, miracles are impossible, and the text is historically composite. Much traditional belief is indeed rejected. Yet Spinoza does not conclude that Scripture is worthless. Most people do not live by philosophical demonstration. Imaginative narratives can orient conduct toward a simple, widely accessible moral teaching. There is tension in this defense. He respects ordinary faith as a route to justice while often describing the multitude in patronizing terms. His separation of theology and philosophy may preserve peace, but it can also assign truth to an intellectual minority and obedience to everyone else. Religious traditions may reasonably object that their practices contain forms of understanding not captured by his contrast between reason and imagination. Political danger enters when a clerical body claims exclusive authority to interpret divine commands and uses that authority against civil peace. Spinoza wants external religious practice under the authority of the state, while inner judgment remains beyond coercive control. This arrangement can limit sectarian domination. It can also empower the sovereign in ways that threaten minority practice. His defense of liberty is real, but it is not identical to a modern scheme of complete institutional separation. The deepest continuity with the ethics lies in the treatment of uncertainty. Superstition is a public form of passive affect. It flourishes where people alternate between hope and fear without understanding causes. Freedom of inquiry supplies no guarantee of wisdom, yet suppression makes adequate correction harder. A community becomes more active when its members can examine claims, compare interpretations, and speak without converting every disagreement into treason against God. Thus, the book's famous defense of philosophizing is not an optional liberal ornament. It follows from the metaphysics of mind. Thought cannot be transferred like property. A sovereign may compel speech or silence in some circumstances, but cannot directly command belief. Attempts to rule inward judgment produce hypocrisy, resentment, and division. To govern human beings as they are, politics must respect the natural limits of power. Part 15. The Politics of Thought and Power. Spinoza's political philosophy begins from power before permission. By natural right, Each being does whatever its determinate power enables it to do. Human beings never step outside nature to sign a contract from a neutral position. Fear, hope, need, imitation, and reason draw them into common life. Political order is one of nature's ways of composing many powers into a more stable pattern. An individual alone is fragile. Others can threaten, but they also supply the greatest resources for survival and development. By coordinating action, people create a collective power greater than any private power. The sovereign's right is this effective power of the multitude, organized through institutions and obedience. If the multitude withdraws support, the legal language of authority cannot by itself restore the lost capacity to govern. This is one difference from a purely moralized theory of law. A ruler may claim unlimited right on paper while lacking power to make people comply. Conversely, subjects never transfer every power. They cannot simply hand over the ability to judge, feel resentment, or form beliefs. Spinoza's realism asks what institutions can actually sustain, and what attempts at control will generate causes of resistance. The end of the state in the theological political treatise is freedom. In the later political treatise, Spinoza emphasizes peace and security of life. These aims need not conflict if peace means more than the absence of fighting. A population kept motionless by terror resembles a wasteland, not a flourishing commonwealth. Genuine peace is a stable coordination in which people can develop and use their powers. Freedom of thought follows from both principle and prudence. People cannot be forced to believe at command, and attempts to suppress judgment often make the state less secure. Spinoza does not defend every expression in every circumstance. Speech that operates as direct incitement against the political order may be restricted in his scheme. His liberty is broad and important, yet it is tied to civil stability rather than grounded in an unlimited individual right against the state. Democracy appears as the most natural and, in one sense, most absolute form of government because collective power is least alienated from those who compose it. Large, deliberative bodies can correct private bias through discussion. People sharpen judgment by asking, listening, and arguing. Institutions should be designed so that even officials led by passion find their interests connected with the common good. Good government cannot depend on rulers becoming saints. Political reason is thus partly built into procedures. A private person may be wise on one question and captured by ambition on another. Councils, public rules, dispersed offices, and broad participation allow one limitation to meet another. The Commonwealth can become more rational than its members at a given moment, not because it has a mystical mind, but because its structure filters and combines their powers. The unfinished political treatise studies monarchy and aristocracy before its brief chapter on democracy breaks off. Spinoza recommends councils, checks, rotation, and arrangements that reduce the risk of private capture. His political method resembles his psychology. Instead of condemning ambition and fear as if they could be removed by decree, institutions redirect their causal force. A stable constitution is a collective technique for becoming less passive. His natural right doctrine remains disturbing. If right extends as far as power, does successful conquest become right by definition? Spinoza distinguishes what can be done from what is best, and he measures a commonwealth by rational peace and human development. Still, the vocabulary can seem to deprive the oppressed of a moral claim not yet backed by power. Modern rights language often exists precisely to criticize effective domination before the victim can defeat it. His democracy also excludes. In the surviving final chapter, women, servants, foreigners, children, and people without an approved independent standing are denied participation in the model under discussion. The argument for women's exclusion appeals to supposed natural inequality and is not redeemed by the incompleteness of the text. It conflicts with the wider promise of a philosophy that explains differences through conditions and shared human nature. This failure matters conceptually. A political order that withholds education, property, and public experience can then present the resulting inequality of power as natural evidence for exclusion. Spinoza is usually skilled at exposing such circular effects. Here he participates in one. Later readers can use his own causal method against his conclusion. Examine how institutions manufacture the incapacity they claim merely to observe. The political value that survives is not a finished constitutional blueprint. It is the idea that freedom depends on composition. A citizen cannot become secure by inward discipline alone when public life is ruled by arbitrary fear. Institutions shape imagination, trust, and possibility. Responsibility is therefore distributed. We ask what a person did, but also what arrangements repeatedly make similar actions likely. That distribution does not dissolve individual agency into a faceless system. Individuals are the active parts through which institutions persist or change. A law, meeting, school, household, and platform are patterns of coordinated conduct. When people understand those patterns, they may form a more powerful multitude. Political freedom is necessity becoming more intelligible and more jointly organized, never necessity vanishing. Spinoza's political realism begins with a refusal to design the state for imaginary citizens. People are moved by fear, hope, rivalry, loyalty, indignation, and the desire for recognition. A durable political order cannot depend on everyone becoming philosophically rational. It must arrange institutions so that ordinary motives can support common security. This is not cynicism. It is an attempt to protect political design from moral wishes that disappear under pressure. Right, in the state of nature, extends as far as power. This formula can sound like a celebration of force, but Spinoza is describing effective capacity rather than granting moral approval to domination. A person's formal permission means little without the power and social conditions to exercise it. Political right becomes stable through collective power. Individuals join because isolation leaves them vulnerable, and the Commonwealth can secure possibilities that private strength cannot maintain. The sovereign's power is nevertheless limited by human nature. An authority may issue a command against inward conviction, but it cannot make belief follow by decree. It may demand public silence, yet the resulting fear and resentment can weaken loyalty. Power that exists only on paper is not effective power. A state undermines itself when its commands generate more resistance than cooperation. This helps explain Spinoza's defense of freedom to philosophize. Open inquiry is not merely a private luxury tolerated by a generous ruler. It can contribute to public peace by allowing disagreement to appear in words rather than conspiracies. Suppression gives authorities poorer information and encourages citizens to hide what they think. The state may preserve an image of unity while losing contact with the causes of discontent. Freedom of expression is not simple in practice. Speech can threaten, defraud, coordinate violence, or deliberately destroy another person's standing. Spinoza's argument does not provide a complete modern legal doctrine. Its lasting insight is that restrictions must be judged causally. Do they actually protect common power, or do they protect officials from correction? Does coercion prevent harm, or does it manufacture the hostility it claims to remove? The answer depends on institutions, evidence, and proportionality. Democracy interests Spinoza because it most closely preserves the natural equality of participants while transforming scattered power into collective rule. He does not offer a contemporary democracy of universal inclusion. The exclusions and assumptions of his period remain, yet his framework allows a strong criticism of oligarchy. When public institutions serve a narrow group, the Commonwealth loses the agreement through which its power was formed. Fear may preserve obedience temporarily, but fear is unstable and expensive. Religious authority occupies a central place in this analysis. Spinoza does not simply oppose religion to politics. He distinguishes the ethical teaching of justice and charity from speculative claims used to control thought. When clerical interpreters claim exclusive access to divine command, disagreement becomes impiety and political rivalry gains sacred intensity. Historical reading of Scripture can reduce this danger by returning texts to language, audience, and purpose. Political freedom, like personal freedom, is a matter of organized power. Citizens are freer when institutions enable them to understand, cooperate, and act without constant fear. A state is stronger when it can tolerate truthful criticism because its legitimacy does not depend on compulsory admiration. Spinoza's sober lesson is that liberty and stability need not be enemies. Under suitable arrangements, liberty can be one of stability's deepest causes. Part 16. The Weight of the Objections. Spinoza's system is impressive, partly because its difficulties gather at the same points as its ambitions. He wants complete intelligibility, one immanent nature, genuine human activity, and ethical transformation without uncaused will. If any bridge between these claims fails, the structure may preserve its beauty while losing some of its force. The strongest objections deserve to be heard together. The first concerns the proof of one substance. Spinoza defines substance as conceived through itself, argues that substances cannot share an attribute, and concludes that infinite substance alone exists. Critics question whether conceptual independence entails ontological independence, whether attributes individuate as he claims, and whether modes can be set aside during the proof. If substance monism is not demonstrated, later claims about God or nature lose their stated foundation. The geometric method intensifies this concern. Definitions in mathematics can construct a precise object within an accepted field. Definitions in metaphysics may conceal substantive claims. Calling God absolutely infinite does not by itself show that such a being exists or includes every attribute. Spinoza offers several arguments, not a bare definition, but readers who reject the causal and conceptual principles will not be carried forward by the formal sequence. The form cannot compel the premises. The second objection concerns necessity. Even if every event has a cause, why must everything be necessary in the strongest sense? Modern causal determinism is often distinguished from the claim that no other total world was possible. Spinoza's text contains powerful statements that things could not have been produced in another way, yet scholars debate how modal notions operate across substance and finite modes. The strongest necessitarian reading remains influential, not uncontested. Then comes moral responsibility. A system can justify protection, education, deterrence, and repair without ultimate desert. But many people believe blame also recognizes that an offender truly could have chosen otherwise under the same conditions. Spinoza must say this belief rests on ignorance. His alternative may reduce cruelty in punishment, yet it can seem unable to honor remorse, apology, and moral address as more than useful causal devices. A Spinozist reply is that remorse and apology are not degraded by having causes. An apology can express new understanding of harm and become part of a changed character. What disappears is the idea of a self that authored its nature before acting. Whether that loss weakens responsibility or makes it more honest is a question his philosophy clarifies without settling for everyone. The third objection concerns activity. A finite person is always determined by external causes. When an action follows from an adequate idea, the idea still has a causal history reaching beyond the person. Why call it self-determined? Spinoza distinguishes an explanation through the person's nature from one in which the person is merely a partial cause. Critics may wonder whether this distinction supports robust agency or only names different kinds of determined process. The musician again offers the best response and its limit. A practiced phrase follows through the musician's organized skill, so the musician is an adequate cause in a meaningful sense. Yet the skill depends on teachers, instruments, health, and culture. Spinoza accepts the dependence and treats self-causation as a matter of degree. Anyone demanding absolute authorship will remain unsatisfied, because absolute authorship is exactly what he denies to finite beings. The fourth objection concerns mind and body. Parallel causal orders avoid interaction between substances, but the relation between an idea and its bodily object remains obscure. If mental and physical explanations never cross, how does evidence from bodily injury inform an account of mind? Spinoza's identity claim may answer that we study one event under different descriptions. Even so, mapping his attributes onto contemporary explanation is difficult, and no simple appeal to parallelism resolves it. The fifth objection concerns ethical intellectualism. Spinoza places great confidence in adequate understanding. Human beings, however, can use sophisticated knowledge to pursue domination. Groups disagree about benefit. Trauma and habit may resist causal insight. Material deprivation can make contemplation inaccessible. His political writings partly correct the individual focus by emphasizing institutions, but the ideal of the rational person may still underestimate conflict and dependence. The sixth objection concerns attachment. Stable joy in the eternal may appear to devalue the particular. We love this friend, this place, this mortal voice. To protect ourselves by loosening attachment could become a refined withdrawal from life. Spinoza's defense is that active love need not be weak love. Understanding another as a finite part of nature may deepen care while reducing possession. Whether his system makes enough space for irreducible grief is less clear. Finally, the eternity of the mind tests the coherence of the whole. If mind is the idea of an existing body, what remains when that body no longer endures? If memory and imagination perish, in what sense is the eternal intellect still this mind? Interpretations can make the doctrine impersonal, structural, or perspectival. None restores ordinary personal survival, and some critics conclude that the closing propositions exceed what the earlier system can support. These objections do not leave nothing behind. They separate the levels of Spinoza's achievement. One may reject the proof of substance while valuing the analysis of passive affect. One may doubt the eternity of mind while accepting that knowledge of causes changes emotion. One may oppose his account of natural right while retaining his insight that coercive power depends on the multitude. The system invites judgment as well as admiration. Spinoza's influence has often worked through such selective inheritance. Enlightenment critics of religious authority, German debates over pantheism, later materialists and idealists, modern theories of affect, and democratic interpretations have each found different resources in him. Leibniz met him and wrestled with his thought while rejecting its necessity. Much later, thinkers including Hegel, Marxist readers, and Gilles Deleuze treated Spinoza as a major alternative to philosophies built around isolated subjects. Influence here is a field of arguments, not a single line of agreement. The most responsible contemporary use is therefore neither devotion nor dismissal. Spinoza can illuminate how environments shape desire without becoming a substitute for empirical psychology. He can sharpen questions about embodied mind without being called a neuroscientist. He can support institutional analysis without authorizing every policy in his state. To think with him is also to notice where his own causes and limits entered the work. Use requires the same causal honesty. Part 17. The Freedom of Understanding. We began with an ordinary gesture, a hand reaching for water, a reply withheld, a promise kept. From within the moment, the action may feel like a beginning detached from everything before it. Spinoza asks us to see more. The hand belongs to a body with needs and habits. The reply passes through memory, fear, language, and judgment. The promise lives within relationships and institutions that taught it meaning. Nothing starts from nothing. What, then, has become of freedom? The uncaused opening has closed. In its place stands a difference among ways of being caused. We can be driven by an encounter whose force we register but do not understand. We can also form a more adequate idea, connect the encounter with its conditions, and act through a wider organization of our own power. Both processes are necessary. They are not equally ours. This answer is persuasive where it shows that explanation need not humiliate agency. A reason does not become less a reason when its history is known. A skill does not become less expressive because practice formed it. A public reform does not become pointless because fear and cooperation have causes. Understanding can alter a causal pattern because understanding is itself an event with effects. Spinoza is also persuasive when he links joy with increased capacity. Joy is not a prize placed beyond activity. It appears in the movement from scattered reaction toward coherent action, in a friendship that expands both lives, in a shared explanation that makes an old fear more manageable, or in an institution that lets more people think and speak. Such joy remains finite, but it is not trivial. The doubts remain. The proof that all reality is one substance may not compel us. The strongest necessity may seem greater than causation requires. Moral responsibility may need a language of dignity and claim that cannot be translated entirely into power and use. The eternity of an impersonal intellect may offer little comfort beside the death of a particular person. And Spinoza's own democracy stopped at exclusions his broader principles should have challenged. We do not need to hide these failures to retain the discipline of his question. Before condemning an action as inexplicable wickedness, ask what desires, images, and conditions composed it. Before praising a decision as pure independence, ask which relationships made the capacity possible. Before treating emotion as an enemy, ask what change in power it expresses. Before demanding inward resilience, ask whether public arrangements keep producing avoidable fear. This discipline changes responsibility without abolishing it. A person can be held answerable as the organized source through which an action occurred. The response can protect others, name the harm, and become a cause of future change. At the same time, a community can be held answerable for conditions it maintains. There is no final refuge in character alone or in structure alone. Finite powers are nested within other powers. Spinoza's freedom is modest because no one becomes a kingdom within nature. It is demanding because greater understanding must be built, repeated, embodied, and shared. A slogan about necessity accomplishes very little. The passive affect often remains stronger than the correct sentence. Freedom grows when a truer idea acquires enough life in us to reorganize attention, desire, habit, and relation. The intellectual love of God gives this work its widest horizon. Stripped of personal providence, it names the joy of understanding a singular thing as part of the infinite order of nature. Some will experience that idea as religious, others will hear a severe naturalism. In either case, the center is not submission to a hidden plan. It is an active consent to intelligibility, joined with clear recognition of our finite place. At night, a city may appear still from a distant window. Yet water moves through pipes, bodies turn in sleep, late trains pass, messages arrive, and countless small causes continue beyond sight. The stillness is not an absence of activity. It is a wider pattern in which each motion has become too quiet or too far away to command attention. Spinoza offers a similar change of distance. Close to our own desire, we feel ourselves beginning. Farther back, we see histories and relations moving through us. Farther still, we see one nature, without an outside, expressing itself in forms that meet, strengthen, misunderstand, and pass away. The wider view does not make the local movement unreal. It shows what the movement belongs to. Perhaps freedom is not a gap in that belonging. Perhaps it is the growing ability to understand the pattern, to become a steadier part of it, and to help compose relations in which other finite beings can become steadier too. The causes continue. Within them, a mind can become less like a leaf carried without orientation and more like a living branch, still moved by the whole tree, yet holding its own leaves toward the light.